There is a truth about addiction that most people will never discover, not because it's hidden, but because seeing it would force them to confront something far more frightening than addiction itself, themselves. Most people think addiction begins with a substance, a cigarette, a drink, a screen, a relationship, a habit. But addiction rarely begins there. Those are only the symptoms, the visible scars of an invisible wound. And the deeper truth is this: the thing controlling your life is rarely the thing you think you're addicted to. The alcohol isn't the addiction. The phone isn't the addiction. The validation isn't the addiction. The desire isn't even the addiction. The addiction is escape. Escape from loneliness. Escape from uncertainty. Escape from pain. Escape from yourself. Carl Jung understood something that modern culture still struggles to accept. People do not become trapped because they love pleasure. They become trapped because they fear reality. And the reality they fear most is the reality within. You see, every human being carries a hidden world beneath consciousness, a forgotten landscape of rejected emotions, unhealed wounds, unspoken fears, abandoned dreams, a place Jung called the shadow. Most people spend their entire lives trying to outrun it. Some use success, some use relationships, some use entertainment, some use substances, but the mechanism is always the same. The object changes, the escape remains. And tonight, we're going to walk directly into that darkness, not to become lost, but to finally understand why so many people stay trapped. Because the moment you understand addiction, you begin to understand human nature itself. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Chapter 1. Addiction was never about pleasure. Most people believe addiction is a pursuit of pleasure. But this is one of the greatest psychological illusions ever created. Pleasure is rarely the destination. It's the distraction. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how little joy there actually is inside most addictions? The smoker isn't smiling. The alcoholic isn't celebrating. The compulsive scroller isn't fulfilled. The person trapped in destructive relationships isn't happy, yet they keep returning, again and again and again. Why? Because addiction isn't chasing pleasure. It's fleeing discomfort. This distinction changes everything. The human mind is not designed to seek happiness above all else. It is designed to avoid pain. And pain takes many forms: loneliness, rejection, meaninglessness, shame, fear, existential uncertainty. Most people would rather experience temporary suffering than face these emotions directly. That is where addiction enters. It offers relief, not freedom. Relief, a temporary anesthetic for a permanent wound. And relief is seductive, because relief feels like survival. Imagine a man sitting alone at night. The world is silent. His thoughts become louder. Questions emerge. Am I enough? Am I wasting my life? Why do I feel empty even after everything I've accomplished? These questions are uncomfortable. So he reaches for distraction, a drink, a screen, a habit, anything to silence the voice. The tragedy is that the voice never disappears. It simply waits. This is why addictions grow stronger over time. The problem remains unresolved. The wound remains untreated. Only the anesthesia becomes stronger. Nietzsche understood this long before modern psychology. He observed that human beings often prefer comforting illusions over uncomfortable truths. People do not fear suffering as much as they fear meaninglessness. And when meaning disappears, pleasure becomes a substitute religion. This explains why modern society is surrounded by abundance yet haunted by anxiety. Never before have people had so many distractions. Never before have they felt so empty. Because distractions cannot answer existential questions. They can only postpone them. The uncomfortable truth is this: every addiction is a conversation you refuse to have with yourself. Every craving carries a message. Every obsession hides a wound. Every escape conceals a fear. And until you understand the fear, the addiction will continue changing forms. People quit smoking and become addicted to work. Leave toxic relationships and become addicted to validation. Stop drinking and become addicted to achievement. The object changes, the mechanism remains. This is why so many people feel trapped. They think they're fighting a habit. In reality, they're fighting an unmet psychological need. And that brings us to something even darker. Because if addiction isn't about pleasure, then what exactly is creating the pain underneath? To answer that question, we must enter Jung's most controversial idea, the shadow. And this is where the real journey begins. Chapter 2. The shadow. The person you pretend not to be. Carl Jung believed that every human being lives two lives: the life they show the world and the life they hide from themselves. The first becomes your identity. The second becomes your shadow. The shadow is not evil. That is the first misunderstanding. The shadow is simply everything you learned to reject. Every emotion you were told was unacceptable. Every desire you were taught to suppress. Every fear you were taught to hide. Every weakness you refused to acknowledge. The shadow is not what is bad about you. The shadow is what remains unseen. And what remains unseen becomes powerful. Imagine a child who learns that sadness is weakness. Every time he cries, he's told to be strong. Eventually, he stops expressing sadness. But sadness doesn't disappear. It goes underground, into the shadow. Years later, he becomes an adult. Successful, disciplined, respected, yet strangely angry, restless, disconnected. Because the emotion he buried is still alive. It never left. It simply changed form. This is how the shadow operates. What is denied internally returns externally. What is rejected psychologically returns behaviorally. What is unconscious eventually becomes destiny. Jung famously warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people hear this quote. Few understand its implications. It means the parts of yourself you refuse to face are often the very forces controlling your decisions. Your relationships, your ambitions, your predictions, everything. The shadow doesn't disappear because you ignore it. It grows. Silently. Patiently. Like pressure building beneath the surface of the ocean. Eventually, it seeks release. And addiction becomes one of its favorite escape routes. Because addiction offers temporary distance from the shadow. For a few moments, the pain quiets down. The loneliness fades. The anxiety softens. The emptiness disappears. But only temporarily. Then reality returns, usually stronger than before. This creates the cycle. Pain, escape, relief, shame, pain again. Most people spend years trapped inside this loop, without realizing what is happening. They think they're fighting temptation. They're actually avoiding self-confrontation. And here's where things become dangerous. Because the more disconnected you become from your shadow, the easier you are to manipulate. The easier you are to control. The easier you are to addict. Modern society understands this better than most people realize. And in the next chapter, we're going to explore a disturbing truth. Why the modern world profits from your cravings, and why some of the most powerful systems on earth depend on your inability to sit alone with yourself. Because the battle isn't only inside your mind. It's happening all around you, and most people never even notice. Chapter 3. Why modern society profits from your cravings. There is something disturbing about the modern world. Something most people sense, but rarely articulate. You are surrounded by people telling you to be free, yet almost everything around you profits from your lack of freedom. Think about it. The wealthiest companies on earth are not selling products. They are selling attention. And attention follows desire. This is why your phone vibrates, why notifications appear, why videos autoplay, why algorithms seem to know exactly what weakness to target. The goal is not merely to entertain you. The goal is to keep you wanting. Because a satisfied person is difficult to control. A person constantly craving something is predictable, and predictability is profitable. Modern technology did not invent addiction. It industrialized it. The ancient human mind evolved in a world of scarcity. Scarcity of food, scarcity of information, scarcity of social approval. Today, those same psychological systems are being exploited at a scale never before seen in history. The result? Millions of people trapped in invisible loops. Scroll, swipe, click, consume, repeat. The behavior appears harmless, but something deeper is happening. Each time you obey an impulse without awareness, you strengthen a pattern. Each time you seek stimulation to avoid discomfort, you reinforce dependency. And slowly, without realizing it, your attention ceases to belong to you. The Stoics warned about this thousands of years ago. Not smartphones, not social media, but slavery, internal slavery. The inability to govern oneself, the inability to say no to impulses, the inability to remain sovereign in one's own mind. Epictetus observed that people often imagine freedom means doing whatever they want. But true freedom means not being controlled by what you want. That distinction changes everything. Because most people do not own their desires. Their desires own them. Watch carefully. A notification appears. Immediately, attention moves. A message arrives. Anxiety emerges. Someone receives praise. Envy awakens. Someone succeeds. Comparison begins. The mind reacts automatically, like a puppet responding to invisible strings. And here is the frightening truth. The majority of modern manipulation does not occur through force. It occurs through temptation. Nobody forces you to scroll. Nobody forces you to consume. Nobody forces you to stay distracted. You choose it, which makes the prison almost impossible to see, because the bars feel voluntary. Nietzsche understood this danger. He believed that most people never truly choose their lives. Instead, they drift, following social expectations, following unconscious impulses, following collective desires. They become what he called the last man, comfortable, distracted, safe, and spiritually asleep. The last man does not suffer greatly, but neither does he truly live. He avoids risk, avoids struggle, avoids transformation. Most importantly, he avoids himself. And this is precisely why addiction thrives. Because addiction promises comfort without growth, pleasure without meaning, relief without transformation. But every shortcut comes with a hidden cost, and the cost is always paid in consciousness. The more you numb yourself, the less you know yourself. The less you know yourself, the easier you are to manipulate. And the easier you are to manipulate, the further you drift from who you could have become. This is where the modern world becomes dangerous, not because it forces you into chains, but because it convinces you that chains are freedom. And yet, there is an even deeper layer beneath this, because long before social media, long before algorithms, long before adult life itself, something happened. Something that shaped the cravings you carry today. Most addictions do not begin in adulthood. They begin in childhood. And what you're about to discover explains why some wounds continue speaking decades after they were first created. Chapter 4. The childhood wound hidden inside every addiction. Most people remember their childhood as a collection of events. A school, a home, a family, a few happy memories, a few painful ones. But Jung saw something deeper. He understood that childhood is not merely something that happened. Childhood becomes the psychological foundation upon which your entire identity is built. And if that foundation contains hidden fractures, those fractures often reveal themselves later as cravings, not because you are weak, but because the psyche always seeks completion. Think about the people you've met throughout your life. The man obsessed with achievement, the woman desperate for validation, the person terrified of being alone, the perfectionist, the workaholic, the people pleaser. At first glance, they appear completely different, but often they share the same hidden pattern, a wound seeking resolution, a part of themselves still waiting to be seen. Carl Jung observed that what remains unresolved in childhood often reappears in adulthood, disguised as destiny. You think you're choosing. In reality, you're repeating. You think you're pursuing success. You may actually be pursuing approval. You think you're chasing love. You may be chasing the feeling of being chosen. You think you're building power. You may simply be trying to escape helplessness. This is why addiction takes so many forms. The addiction is rarely the goal. The addiction is the strategy, the psyche's attempt to solve an old problem using a new disguise. Consider the child who rarely received attention. Every achievement became a way to earn love. Every success became proof of worth. Years later, that child may become extraordinarily successful. But success never feels like enough. No matter how much they accomplish, the hunger remains. Because they are not pursuing achievement, they are pursuing emotional nourishment, and emotional hunger cannot be satisfied through trophies. Or consider the child who experienced abandonment. Maybe a parent left. Maybe affection was inconsistent. Maybe emotional safety never existed. As an adult, that person may become addicted to relationships, not because they love deeply, but because they fear emptiness, fear solitude, fear abandonment. Every relationship becomes less about connection and more about survival. The partner changes. The fear remains. This is one of the cruelest psychological traps. People often spend decades feeding symptoms while starving the wound underneath. The more they feed the symptom, the stronger the wound becomes. And because the wound remains unconscious, the cycle continues again and again and again, until one day they ask the question most people never ask: what am I really trying to satisfy? That question changes everything, because the moment awareness enters the pattern begins losing power, not immediately, but inevitably. Jung believed that healing begins when the unconscious becomes conscious, when the hidden story finally enters awareness, when the wound is acknowledged rather than escaped. This requires courage, more courage than most people realize, because facing childhood pain means confronting uncomfortable truths. Perhaps your parents loved you but could not understand you. Perhaps you built an identity around pleasing others. Perhaps you've spent your entire life becoming who others wanted rather than discovering who you actually are. These realizations hurt, but they also liberate, because what is seen can be transformed. What remains hidden controls you. This is where Nietzsche enters the story. He believed that human beings are not defined by their wounds. They are defined by what they create from them. The strongest individuals are not those who avoid suffering. They are those who transform suffering into strength, chaos into wisdom, pain into purpose. But before that transformation can happen, something must die. An illusion. The illusion that you can heal while continuing to run. The illusion that distraction is freedom. The illusion that relief is fulfillment. And this brings us to the most important turning point in the entire journey. Because eventually, every person reaches a crossroads. One path leads toward endless repetition. The other leads toward transformation. Jung called that transformation individuation. Nietzsche called it self-overcoming. The Stoics called it mastery. Different words. The same destination. The moment you stop escaping yourself and begin becoming yourself. And that is where our journey goes next. Because what most people call addiction may actually be an invitation to become someone entirely new.